ladies and gentlemen. It is once again that time of the week. What time of the week is it? Oh, and by the way, ladies and gentle them as well. It is that time of the week where we peel back the curtain, we look underneath the headlines, dig underneath there, and uncover what is really going on. We talk about the stuff that the mainstream media does not talk about. We talk about local activism, social justice issues, and also the same at the national and international level. It is the Hoodrat Strategist radio program. As always, the following thoughts, views, and opinions are not necessarily those of 89.1 FM, WIDR Kalamazoo, or Western Michigan University. So we're going to be spending much of the first hour talking about the primary. And with that, hold on, I'm just about to let a co-host in. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. We are back. This is the Hoodrat Strategist radio program. So, joined by my co-host here, Lawrence.
Yo, what up?
Yeah. So, a lot of going on in national, international politics. But we'd be. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I mean, yeah. The week of the stupid has really this last week and the week before. It's been insane. The tariffs has impacted Coca-Cola and stuff like that. So,
really? Wow.
and Pepsi and Coca-Cola, so they are going to be raising their prices on their goods, which Trump did not foresee.
First they destroyed the Coca-Cola polar bear's habitat. And now they're going into livelihood. What the hell, man?
So you have that dumb stuff. You have a federal court in Seattle saying that being able to 3D print guns are stupid and we should not do it, even though the Trump administration came to an agreement with the person who created those designs to do so. Yeah. And that's a dumb story.
Well, it's interesting too because we get a chance to really talk about it later. It's pitting gun owners versus gun manufacturers.
Oh, yeah.
And putting making the NRA a little bit more transparent about where their loyalties actually lie. So,
man, that and just a lot of people, just the logic behind that entire subject pisses me off. Also, the Trump administration is a federal court has said that they need to stop drugging kids that are in detention centers.
Oh, really?
That story.
See, that wasn't common sense.
Right. When we were going to talk about common sense, that story, and the fact that there's still over 700 kids that have not been reunited with their parents, and they were supposed to be. That's another story. Mm-hmm. And there is some good news. Rokana put out a tweet recently going after the military-industrial complex, and that was another good story. And we need to talk about what's going on in our city with tainted water.
Oh yeah, particularly the city of Parchment, and this has been pretty big local news. But for those who don't know, the water in the city of Parchment has been found to be contaminated with PFAS chemicals.
Yeah.
Yep. And actually going to have a guest on later to talk about that a little bit more in depth. But yeah,
anybody who ever lived on the north side or has ever lived in Parchment that lives near the Kalamazoo River, lives near the paper mill, knows how much that area smells so bad, and knows that the paper, and when they find out that the paper mill and the other chemical companies around here have been dumping their stuff in our water, and they wonder why our water is tainted. Yeah, man.
Yep.
It's put in the duh category because it's we've kind of seen this coming.
Oh yeah, and even when you have areas that have been the recipient of industrial blight. So Parchment and Kalamazoo both follow under this. We don't have a lot of active factories in town that much anymore. Parchment, and basically, the manufacturing center in Parchment, and it went the way of a Bruce Springsteen song, kind of. Lost my job at the factory, on the sound company. But I mean, those chemicals stay in the ground. We've even talked about more recently. The family health center over on Alcott is literally built on top of a toxic waste dump site. Of course, they've assured us that it's properly buried and all that stuff. But
But I mean. But the one thing that we should talk about before we get knee deep in that story, because I want to get knee deep in that story, we have to talk about the race is coming up. Man.
As of this time next week, we're gonna have a Democratic candidate for Congress, and we're gonna have a candidate for governor.
We also we need to talk about the Republicans on the other side as well.
Oh, yeah. And actually, we're going to be joined at 5:30. I've got a buddy of mine on the east side of the state. He's kind of an anti-corruption conservative, but I invited him to come on and talk a little bit about the Republican side of it, too. Kind of see what his perspective was on it. And,
man, the John James, I think that's his name. He's running as a Republican. The ads
prospectively against Debbie Stabenow.
Yeah, the ads talking about the ads against him are so funny.
Yeah. She doesn't hate Trump enough.
even though Trump's endorsed John James to defeat Debbie Stabenow. I don't know, man. He's a black conservative that has a lot of very similar policies to Ben Carson, and I'm sitting here like, I don't know, man. I don't know how to deal with you right now. I honestly do not know how to deal with him and his policies. Mm-hmm. Like This is the one time when I hope Debbie Stabenow win, and I don't like Debbie Stabenow.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, jeez.
I think if we're going to talk about our corrupt senators, like Gary Peters is a bit worse. Just look at it. I mean, she's actually fallen on the right side on a couple of issues like net neutrality, but
But then she helps to deregulate Wall Street. Like, oh my God. It's one of those. I'm glad. It's one of those. Okay, you didn't poop in the bed this time. Okay, that's great. Yeah. But you threw all of your food on the wall. Yeah. Like, it's like dealing with a small child. Like looking at the accomplishments of some of our senators. It's like dealing with small children. Yep. But yeah, if we're gonna talk about, we gotta talk about the six, and we gotta talk about our governor race.
Let's dig into the CD6 candidates, and I know we've talked a lot about it on the show, but I mean, Tuesday's the big day. You gotta vote for one of them.
Yeah. Also, man. Oh, before we get into that, shout out to Abdul Al Saeed. I went to his rally with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in Grand Rapids. Yeah. Shout out to that whole rally, and shout out to both of those candidates, especially AOC, Miss Cortez, and the fact that Abdul has Bernie Sanders coming to a rally for him in Detroit. That says a lot.
That is a big deal, ladies and
gentlemen. That's crazy.
I think as the poll number, the most recent poll numbers I saw showed Gretchen at 33% and Abdul at around 27%. So he's gained a lot of ground in a very short amount of time.
Yeah, man.
And that poll was before the Alexandria and Bernie bump. So
I mean,
it's going to be a close one, folks.
It's going to be crazy. And here's the thing. I don't have a problem with Gretchen on most issues. When you are acting shaky on Medicare for all, I do not want to vote for you. Like that's, I think that's as a Democrat. If you're a Democrat and you don't support something that over 80% of your base supports, over 80% of the Democratic base supports Medicare for all. Even if you go by the recent story of the Koch brothers trying to do a hit piece on Medicare for all.
That's some pretty delicious schadenfreude there.
Dog, even their study showed that in a 10-year period, Medicare for all would save us in a 10-year period $2 trillion.
Yeah.
So even by their estimates, and they tried to craft it in the worst way possible, it would still save us in 10 years $2 trillion.
Yeah.
In comparison to the current system that we have now. And a Democrat that wants to represent Michigan is saying that she's not really sure if she wants to support Medicare for all, or she has a different way of looking at it. I'm like, nah, son, I ain't. And that also goes for some of the candidates for some of the candidates in the congressional race in the sixth.
Yeah.
I'm looking at George and Rich. Yeah. Dog, like, I like them on some policies. I don't like the fact that y'all don't support Medicare for all. Like, come on, folks. Come on, folks. Like, there was a story recently of a mother who called the ambulance and her daughter died because she said that she didn't have enough money to pay for the ambulance. And she died because the paramedic said that you're not going to have enough money to pay for the ambulance, so just take her to the hospital anyway.
Yeah, that's the thing that really bugs me the most about a lot of like these more centrist politicians. It's like these asks that we have, like we need Medicare for all now. There's an urgency to it. People are dying. Or, similarly, when here's another kind of very clear litmus test. Both Benak and Long John said just flat out abolish ICE. George, Rich, not so much. They were talking about, we need to reform it, and border security is still important. Again, people's lives are being destroyed right now. There is urgency to issues like this, and you can't sideline it, you can't ignore it, and you can't. I think particularly in the case of Eichels and Franklin, they're trying to kind of play it in the middle so they don't potentially alienate, particularly Rich, who's talked about I want to get the moderate Republicans.
let me just talk down that talking point. Overwhelming majority of Republicans want Medicare for all. Last polling showed that over 77% of Republicans, in comparison to 37% of Republicans, said that they didn't. 77 was for it. 47 was for it, and 37 was against it, and the rest was unsure. So even if, granted, if you put the unsure category in the people who don't want it, that's over 47% of the Republicans want it, and your base already has 80% approval for Medicare for all. Let me to put that in layman's terms, if 1/3 or more of Republicans want a policy and your base is already overwhelmingly for it, then it's a done deal.
Yeah,
it's an absolute done deal.
There's no reason, like, politically to not support it, because it's like, the so-called moderate Republicans, they're not alienated by policy planks like Medicare for all. Are you kidding me?
Right.
Granted, they do get a little bit more fired up over immigration, and I will concede that, but or even gun rights. You know what I'm saying? Like we can have policy debates on guns. We can have policy debates on immigration. All right. If you want, but let me also remind people on those things, on recent polling, overwhelming majority of Americans want universal background checks. Over 87% of Americans want DACA, and they also want immigration reform, as in a way towards citizenship. An overwhelming majority of Americans want that. So running on these policies that not only Republicans also support, but your overwhelming base supports, are no-brainers. But when you're acting flaky on those things, nah, Brian. And I want to talk a little bit too about just the strategy of the individual candidates going forward. And there's only one who I think is actually doing it right, and it's not actually the one I'm going to vote for, and we'll get to that a little bit towards the end. But so you have George, who he's essentially courting conservative Democrats and some communities of color by kind of through proxy of like the philanthropy he's done in some of those communities like Northside and Benton Harbor. You have Rich, who he's decided, I'm gonna try to appeal to moderate Republicans who are disgusted with Trump. I'm going to I've seen him kind of scattershot in a lot of kind of upper class neighborhoods, and to his credit, he's also canvassed a lot of working class neighborhoods as well. Matt Longjohn, from what I can tell, particularly his campaign team, it's all about trying to get as much Democratic blue voter turnout as possible. Now, as Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez said, and as all of us have been saying, like, basically since Bernie, like, the real swing voter that you need to focus on is not red to blue, it's non-voter to voter. And I will give Bannock's team a lot of credit for really understanding that and just going out and knocking on doors without some presupposition about like, oh, what kind of neighborhoods are actually going to mobilize and come out and vote. Because again, you're not. Everybody thinks this blue wave is going to happen automatically. Keep in mind that most people in this district, Fred Upton is not all that offensive. He's not going on TV talking about grabbing people's junk. So it's going to take more than just a blue wave to get him out of his seat. It's going to take you getting people who are excited, getting people who've been disenchanted with the political system, and people who will respond to the fact that, like, look, Fred Upton may not be a monster, but he is a puppet. This election isn't so much about voting out Fred Upton as it is voting out DTE Energy and voting out Monsanto and et cetera, et cetera.
The thing that when it comes back to the candidates of the 6, the congressional race, I'm gonna be honest. This is just my personal opinion, not anybody else's. That's part of the Hoodrat Strategist. Any of our other commentators. There's only 2 people that I actually see running in the on the Democratic side that's actually worth voting for. And there's two people who, if they end up winning, that I would begrudgingly vote for, and that's kind of how I'm feeling right now, man. And it's like just to keep it real. I really like the fact that you have people like Benak and you have Long John who are really progressive. They fit with along. They allow their policies are when it comes to education, when it comes to Medicare for all, when it comes to a living wage, when it comes to criminal justice reform, they have a lot of really good policies, man. Like you can't shake them when it and a lot of their policies are comprehensive. That's the thing that makes it really good.
And I would really recommend too. And I think we speak for everybody else in the show. I think like all of our commentators are either voting for Benak or Long John.
Yeah.
And go to their websites. Benak's like he's got very detailed policy platforms. Matt does too, and he's really gone into a lot of the nuts and bolts in a lot of his forums. And one thing that was kind of a sticking point for a lot of people was. We had him on the show. We talked a little bit about Medicare for all, and just so everybody knows, and in all fairness to all the candidates, Long John did say if the vote were put in front of him, he would vote for it, but he was actually kind of critiquing it from the left, saying there's other things that it should cover, including preventative care, certain elements of elder care. Like his whole background is in medicine, so he kind of came to it with a very specific, almost scientific approach.
Yeah, he came at it with a fine tooth comb because he's in that business. I would expect for him to come into it like that. Even I expect all my candidates to come at things with a fine tooth comb if they're going to represent the 6, because these are issues that are impacting everyone. There's no reason why, if you are sick, you should either go medically bankrupt because you are sick, or you are more worried about the copay than actually receiving care or going to get care for something that could be preventable. Because if you don't get the preventative care, then you're going to have to spend more money on getting something removed or getting extra treatment to get cured. So I mean, like, and if you want to critique something from the left, okay, I have no problem with you wanting to improve something. You can go a little bit too far to the left. But like, you know what I'm saying? Like, you could be on some anarchist stuff, but you know what I'm saying? Like, you know what I'm saying? But Matt's not Matt's trained, and you know what I'm saying? That's why I like his like a lot of his policies as well. I think for me, I just really hope that there's going to be I just really hope that whoever wins, no matter depending on who wins, that we as a group, as Democrats, as independents or whatever, will back the person who wins to go against Fred Upton, because Fred Upton, God Jesus, we need to get some. Fred Upton is the problem that we have to deal with, and we have to get him out of the seat because he doesn't do anything to actually help our district.
Yeah, and I completely agree, and I will deviate a little. I might be a little bit more was it hardcore on this, but like Rich, Matt, Long John, Rich, Long John.
Rich, Matt, and David.
Rich, Matt, and David. Yeah, I would be more than happy to vote for any of them. And as I said, like Rich, his policies are centrist, but to his credit, he hasn't been taking like corporate PAC money or something. And I think he would definitely be a big step up from Upton. George, oh man, I just don't know, man. Like if he wins the primary, the very next day I'm gonna put on an online poll, and that poll is gonna say, should somebody run a write-in candidacy against him, or wait until the next round and primary his ass? Because
here's the thing, man. Dog, look. I think George is cool. Like, look, like we sat here and interviewed him, man. I thought, like, George is cool. It's just that one of the number one policies in our political sphere is getting money out of politics, and he sat here and told us that his way of getting money out of politics is not trying to do what Wolfpack is doing and getting a constitutional amendment to get money out of politics. It's to get Supreme Court justices who understand the Constitution, who understand the law. So his policy on getting money out of politics is at least going to take 20 to 30 years. Until we get a actual Supreme Court that is overwhelmingly progressive, who will overturn Citizens United or want to get money out of politics by having an amendment. Like, no, bro, like that is the most lackluster way of handling policy that I've heard in a while.
Oh yeah,
that is the
well, a lot. He does this a lot too.
That's the gradualism. That's the gradualism way of doing things, and gradualism is the reason why we got Trump.
Yeah, it's either gradualism or kind of just like throwing red meat to the people in the audience, like saying like, "Oh, I'm gonna get Betsy DeVos fired." It's like, you can't do that. It's like you can't do that. Right. And I'll just say, like, on my part, all the other candidates, I feel like it really would be, somebody representing the people going to face off against Upton. They're not taking corporate money. George is corporate money, and it's like it would be like a race. It would end up being a race between Verizon Wireless presents and Kellogg presents.
Yeah. It's basically what did Jimmy Dore always say? It's the Harlem Globetrotters versus the Washington Generals.
Yes. Oh, I thought you were about to say, don't run a Republican against a Republican.
Yeah, no. That's what it is. No, it's no, but that's literally what it is. You have Republican light. You have center. He's a Democrat, so you have Democrat light versus Republican. So it's Coke versus Diet Coke. And if you don't, and most people don't like Diet Coke. So what are they gonna do? They're gonna grab the Coke. They're gonna get the Republican, because that's what usually happens. But this district is too progressive. We live in a district that overwhelmingly voted for Bernie Sanders. This district is too progressive to have someone who's conservative on issues that the overwhelming base of the party wants. That's basically what it is.
Yeah, it really is. It's just such a total mismatch, because I've gone in and sat down to these Democratic Party meetings here in Kalamazoo in the 6th District, and like all of them agree with like the Bernie Sanders policy platform. I think the big problem is just a lot of people are just willing to go, oh, blue no matter who. It's like, well, you got a choice now.
I agree with Nina Turner. Not any blue will do. Not any blue will do. We need to get the right the right candidates for the job. You don't hit a nail with a hammer. You don't hit a nail with a multi-tool wrench. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like that's the thing that makes me a little bit upset when I talk to some of our more conservative friends who are Democrats and who are center-right Democrats. I understand that Fred Upton is the bigger problem in the general. I understand that Fred Upton is the person who we're trying to defeat at the end, but we cannot have him go against somebody who he can easily win, that he can easily beat. Like Fred Upton on policy, he's not going to beat Matt. He's not going to beat David, and I'm not sure about Rich. And on most policies, he's not going to beat Franklin. But the thing that you will see in most general elections is that the Democrat will run towards the right during the general. We don't need people who's going to be conceding and moving towards the right during the general. We need people who are going to stick to the policies that the overwhelming base and that the overwhelming majority of Americans want. And those are progressive policies. They want people who will represent that, and that's what will win. So when it comes to that, people like David, Matt, and Rich have a better chance at beating Upton when it comes based on policy. Like, I feel like George would move more to the right. when he goes against him, and I'm like, dog, we can't have that, man.
And especially, like, I think he would definitely go to the right if he's elected into Congress.
Absolutely.
You know? Yeah.
Right.
Oh, we have a wild Nora has appeared.
Yeah,
Hey, where'd she come from?
So yeah, Nora. I mean, we've been talking about the CD6 race for the past few minutes now.
We also talked about the governor's race, and we do need to talk about.
We'll talk about the governor's race a little bit more in depth in a second.
So, I guess commenting off what you were talking about earlier, I think I'm mostly with Andy on this. Like, I'm leaning towards voting Matt on this primary, but I'd be more than happy to vote for David if he makes it, which I think there's still a good shot. I'm just mostly concerned if between the two, the progressive vote will be split too much, and then we'll get a Rich or a George who has a good chance of running to the right, during the general or during his congressional tenure if that happens. I mean, let's not rule that out. And
Matt has outspent everybody, though.
Yeah, that's really surprising.
Matt has a lot of bread in the bank, man.
That's why it's good being a doctor.
Exactly.
Like, Matt, and that's something that I was like, yo, where's Matt getting his bread from?
He's a doctor and he has doctor friends. And that's like, I guess, one of the things that might, I guess, push him over the top in this primary. And, the fact that he's not taking corporate money is also kind of a big deal.
Oh, yeah.
And probably be enough to, like, still help sustain in the money race, so to speak, against Upton when it comes to it. Which is not just to, be, like, triangulating. I mean, some people suspect that he's, got a shady background because of his ability to perform in the money race. But, which is valid. I understand why people feel that, too. I know that, Benak isn't without his criticisms either. Like, he's kind of trying to take credit for some of the activism in the community that he really wasn't a part of. And the fact that he was told by the MDP to run early on once Eponine announced, and how his team treated our campaign is kind of shady, and I really don't appreciate that.
Yeah, a lot of people ask me why I don't. So I'm not voting for David because he's got he's got the Justice Democrats endorsement and this, that, and what have you. And what I say to that, just to kind of echo what you said, is his platform's in the right places, but just from things that I've seen from his team, particularly early on, Eponine Garrett, for those who don't know, she was the first declared candidate in the race, Democratic Socialists of America member. And there's always a big sense of just from his team kind of just waiting for her to drop out. And there's a lot of some borderline harassment in there, and just kind of left a bad taste in my mouth. And like you said, there's been kind of some, I think I'd call it some white savior issues. So, a specific example, he came to one BLM meeting at Fire, and he was very quiet. He really didn't talk to anybody. Our campaign, we stayed and talked a little bit more. And then the next day, it's I've been working with BLM. It's what? You should at least say I listened to BLM, and that's what I said. So, but that said, those are some personality issues, and they're very important to keep in mind. I always question why. It's my biggest sticking point is Eponine Garrett was running. She was the first declared candidate. Wouldn't you have a conversation with them at some point to see if you still needed to run? That's my whole thing. If he decided after that conversation, it's no, I still think that I would stand a better chance of beating Fred Upton. I totally understand that, but it was just kind of this expectation that Eponine's campaign would just, go away and fizzle out. And all
right, I'm going to play devil's advocate because I did not know any of this. I did not know any of the stuff that y'all just said beforehand. But I am going to play devil's advocate. It is, it's. I was gonna say that's basic politics. You know what I'm saying? The primaries are gonna get ugly. Look at what happened with Bernie and with Hillary. Look at what happened with Hillary and Barack. There were elbows being thrown during primaries, and that's how it always is. When it is a little bit disconcerting because even though we are all on the same team trying to get rid of Fred Upton, we shouldn't be going so hard that we're not able to mend fences so we can stand as a united front.
Well, I think the biggest problem with it was just kind of using opposition talking points. Like, if you're part of the progressive movement, you should not harp on a candidate for being too young or, being like a woman and whatnot. And that's kind of like what ended up happening is from, and a lot of this wasn't from David himself, but it was from a lot of his campaign team. So, it's, again,
so it's guilt by association because it is his people. Yeah, and that's what you're saying. And actually, okay, I agree with that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, and I feel that it's, again, it goes back to being disheartening, but it also goes back to being the whole trash talking. And I relate politics a lot to sports. So you have people who play the game like Michael Jordan, but you also got people who play the game like Reggie Miller. Yeah. And Reggie Miller was one of the most spit talking people in the game. He played the game to get in your head, and you were going to get mad at him the entire time. And the only way you could beat him is by either beating him during the game or by getting in his head. And some people play the game like that.
It's interesting. It's like, there's been a lot of trash talking going on. I know, like, a lot of Benak and a lot of his people have been, like, kind of zooming in on, like, Long John's, money ties. And then, Long John's been really outspoken about all of, George Franklin's corruption and shenanigans. And then Rich has actually been pretty quiet, come to think of it. It'd be funny if he was like a sleeper winner or something. But
I mean,
go check out the Pro KZoo discussion board. It's like some
the shade.
The shade is everywhere.
The shade. The thing, but again, this goes back to maybe because I relate a lot of my politics through hip hop means, and also related to sports. And I'm like, dog, like, you're gonna have. I expect for people to have a grimy primary, and I expect for there to be shade and some low blows. I mean, nothing in my mind is as vicious as when George W. Bush went against John McCain, and he talked about John McCain's black daughter. Like, you know what I'm saying? God. Let's keep it real. Yeah. Like, let's keep it real about politics. You're going to have moments where people who are running, there's going to be low blows. There's going to be shade. Like, it's the same way when people get upset before a boxing match because people are talking junk about they're talking junk about the other person, forgetting the fact that they're about to go into a ring and try to give each other brain cancer by punching each other. This is the same thing in politics. You cannot get mad when people throw shade or are using kind of underhand, like they should not be using underhanded techniques. It's not excusable. But within the same time, when you sign up to run, you're going to get shade. You're going to see these things happen. So you have to prepare for it. You know what I'm saying? You can't get into a fight and say, "Hey, don't hit me in my face."
Oh, no,
you know what I'm saying?
A couple things I will say, like, what I do like about Benak in comparison to Long John is so far I like his strategy better. I mean, it could be different for both of them once the primary is over. But with Benak, like, knocking on everyone's doors, trying to, like, get all the non-voters he can, I really appreciate that. With Long John, I've noticed that, like, in his first ad he put out, like, on TV, he's like, "Oh, look how bad Trump is!" Like, come on, I know you can do better. I know you've got these really good policies.
Repeating the same. It's repeating the same mistakes that Clements made, where he had that ad where, like, "Oh, look, I'm like Indiana Jones," and whoa, the Fred Upton's tied to Trump, and that one where it's like it might as well be. I imagine, like, Matt Longjohn's like, "Hey, guess everyone, I'm a doctor," and it's like zany Bill Nye sound effects.
Oh my God.
And it's like, look at this picture of Trump eating a taco.
No, here's this thing, man. Like, I like Matt's policies. We've gone over Matt's policies. Yeah. And that's the thing that makes me upset. It's the same thing that makes me upset when I look at Gretchen's ads on YouTube. I'm like, you have policy. You're running as a Democrat. Talk about the policy in your ads. Mm-hmm. If you're only giving platitudes and cliches, then what makes you different than anyone else? If you're for Medicare for all, talk about how you want to give talk about how you're not taking corporate PAC money.
Yeah.
Talk about the fact that you want to give the people who run in your district a living wage or universal free college and tuition. Like, talk about those things, since those are things that you're running on. But to your credit, when you were talking about Matt's ads, that was one of the first things I saw, and I got pissed. I'm like, Matt, bruh, come on, son. Like, it was the same thing with Gretchen's commercials.
Yeah.
Like, she's one of her first commercials that she had was, she was like, I'm always for collective bargaining. I will always stand with unions. I was like, good job.
Yeah.
But one of the next ads, she has nothing but black people talking about how she's the right kind of candidate, but no one's talking about her policies.
Nope.
They're like, and like not one person that's in that ad is actually talking about the policies that she stands for. And I'm sitting here like, bruh, you are doing the same thing that Hillary Clinton did during her campaign. I need you to stop. Stop it.
All right, so I think we should probably start pivot talking about the governor's race, but it's like any other last thoughts about the congressional race before next week's primary?
Look, people, primaries matter. You cannot complain about the general election if you did not vote during the primary. If you did vote during the primary and your person did not win, please weigh your options out before you vote. I'm not vote shaming you, but remember, during the general election, our biggest thing is to beat Upton. Unless it's George. If it's George, then we're gonna have to have a discussion about this. Yeah, we're gonna have to have a conversation. But yeah. but if it's Matt or David or Rich, we cool. Right. Like personally, I'll probably be voting for David because I still rock with David, even though what David did to Epping is some BS. When I talk to David, when I see David again, me and him gonna have that conversation. Yeah, dog. Nah, son. Like, when it comes to the 6th congressional district, y'all need to vote. Please come out and vote. You use your civic duty to vote for somebody who will actually vote, who will actually support you and want to fight for your issues. That's my take.
I guess in terms of like what's at stake for beating Upton, keep in mind this guy is the chair of the Energy and Commerce Committee. Okay. Any bill related to energy and a lot of them are environmental regulations have to go through him. And we all know about his environmental record, how it used to be okay until the Koch brothers shoved their foot down his you-know-where. Yeah. And, basically forced him to be a climate denier and one of the biggest hardliners against the environment in Congress. So
Fred voted against net neutrality.
That too. He also takes more from the telecoms than any other member of the House except for one person.
84% of our country wants net neutrality. Yeah. Fred Upton voted to destroy net neutrality. Like, are you kidding me?
So something else, not to get while Pro Kazoo is throwing more shade at each other enough that you'd forget that it's summer. Yeah. Don't forget.
Sorry. Yeah.
Don't forget that first of all, like, there's other races that are not the CD6 that aren't the governor's race either that, like, keep an eye out. Like, there's the 61st. I mean, I honestly haven't had the time to do research on that one. There's a couple others in the state house in the county.
There's a strong progressive running out in Ashtemo right now to unseat Iden, Thomas Whitner. So, try to bring him on the show soon.
Bruh. Yeah. I just need to talk about how John James, who's running as a Republican to go against Debbie Stabenow, if we can get him on the show, because I got some questions for him. Because after looking at his platform, there's a bunch of stuff that I need to talk to him about. Yeah. Because, boy, that's upsetting.
Okay, so any other thoughts, Nora?
Yeah, something else I've noticed interesting that Pro Kazoo is doing coming up to the primary season. The whole canvassing for our values thing. The candidates they have listed are all in like really safe blue districts. So what they're doing is kind of moot point, and it like kind of really highlights just how not effective an organization they are, perhaps on purpose. And
canvassing for our values.
That's literally what the event is called. Like they're having people canvass in Kalamazoo, already a very, very safely blue area, to vote for whoever wins the primary, CD6,
whoever,
and everyone in the Kalamazoo area that's going to win anyways. Like what are they doing if they want to have the blue wave? This is not how you do it.
See, here's the thing. This is why I keep harping on policy. If you care about where you stand on issues, then you can take your issues anywhere, and even if people do not agree with you, they will rock with you. Case in point, Bernie Sanders had a town hall in West Virginia and in districts that heavily voted for Trump and got standing ovations when he talked about Medicare for all, free college tuition, and a living wage. Like, come on, son. If we're gonna be in Michigan and we're gonna talk about how we want to move forward with our ideas of legalizing marijuana or criminal justice reform, then we need to have those issues and talk to everyone, not just be stuck in our own echo chamber.
Yeah, I hear you on that. I think I'm gonna give a few parting thoughts. Somebody like, especially like me and Nora, we've been watching this primary, go down since the very beginning. And, like I said, I'm most likely going to vote for Long John. Well, I am voting for Long John. I'll just say that. That said, I really hope either him or David take the CD6 next Tuesday. And, I'd encourage everybody, particularly look at Matt's and David's platforms. They would be, hands down, the most progressive candidate we've ever tried to run against Fred Upton. But tell your friends, make sure they're interested in following this race. I know a lot of our friends are starting to get really hyped about Abdul and all that stuff. But
we need to talk
CD6,
we need to talk about the governor's race.
Yeah.
CD6
I'm gonna call up my friend from the east side and we can start diving into that. Please pay attention to what's going on. And if you want to go back, we've got interviews with all of the candidates on our YouTube channel. So you can go back, listen to them, see what you like, see what you don't like. All I've got to say, I'm going to criticize all of the candidates one last time. Whoever wins, you got to put a lot more footwork and do a lot more work into engaging with marginalized communities, because I've seen all these town halls with Democratic Party officials and with liberal activists. You need to go to a church on the north side. You need to go to a community center in Benton Harbor. You need to take unscripted questions from the people in this district who are suffering the most. Yeah. All right, so with that, let's take a quick little break. When we come back, we're going to talk about the gubernatorial race going on here in the state of Michigan. Y'all are listening to the Hoodrat Strategist radio program, only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo, your only source for political revolution.
This is Maria Bamford, and oh no, I screwed it up. Okay. This is Maria Bamford, and you're listening. No, I did it again. This is Maria Bamford, and you're listening to WIDR FM.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. We are back. This is the Hoodrat Strategist radio program. So we're talking about the primaries coming up on the 7th, and we wanted to pivot to all of the statewide stuff going on. We're actually joined by Jack Stearns from out on the east side of the state. He's an anti-corruption conservative, and we wanted to kind of broaden out and talk about some, what's going on in the Republican primary as well. Just to kind of get a full scope of everything that's going on. So, hi, Jack. How are you today? Oh. All right. Sorry, Jack, could you speak again?
I'm doing well, guys. Thanks for having me.
Sorry, I didn't have your audio turned up for a second there. All right.
See, there's a left winger trying to mute conservative.
I'm like MSNBC up in here. Oh man, that's
Very
terrible.
professional. Very professional.
Oh man. All right. Well, let's go ahead and start with you, especially since we invited you to come on the show, talk about this a little bit. So we've got. On the Democratic side, there's Abdul El Sayed, Gretchen Whitmer, Sri Thanadar, and just kind of curious, if you could tell us, you're kind of I described you as an anti-corruption conservative. Tell us just kind of your take on the Republicans running in the gubernatorial race, and just kind of your own personal assessment of them.
Right. So there are 4 candidates on the Republican side running for governor currently. You have Lieutenant Governor Brian Calley, who's Snyder's number 2. He's probably, I would say, the most centrist of the bunch. His big thing is he wants to invest in infrastructure, including repairing Michigan's roads, and he really wants to invest in improving K-12 education. Then you have Attorney General Bill Schuette, who was endorsed by President Trump. He's a little bit more, I would say, to the right of Brian Calley. And then you have Patrick Kolbeck, who is a state senator. And then you have, lastly, Jim Hines, who has the shortest or non-existent political history of the bunch. He's an obstetrician, which is, for those of your listeners who don't know, that is the OB in the OBGYN. Mm-hmm. So he deals with a lot of, pregnancy patients and helps women through their pregnancies and whatnot. So I would say that of the 4, Schuette probably has the best chance of getting the nomination. A lot of that is from the momentum that he received when he received Trump's endorsement. Of the 4 Republicans, Brian Calley has the most detailed plans for how he would govern, since he's been in the governor's office, and so he has very detailed plans. He's fairly centrist. I don't think he's looking to really rock the boat politically. He's kind of going to continue Snyder's job development. He's a big supporter of apprenticeships programs to help people who maybe don't have bachelor's degrees or master's degrees reach a skilled apprentice program to maybe help them into the workforce. Bill Schuette, as the Attorney General, he's been very familiar with the legislative movements. He's looking to cut more taxes and sort of redirect our spending towards infrastructure, similar to Brian Calley. He's pushing himself as the very pro-growth candidate for the Republicans. He really wants to bring businesses to Michigan and increase Michigan's population to add more taxpayers, which he thinks will increase revenue when you have more people working. Patrick Kolbeck is a little bit more of a far right kind of a guy. He's an engineer and a state senator. My biggest issue with Patrick Kolbeck is that he seems very of the 4. I would say he seems the most Trumpian in that he says a lot of politically charged things. The biggest thing I had a problem with was that he's kind of Islamophobic, in that he gave a 20-minute PowerPoint at a political seminar where he described the dangers of Islam and how they're looking to infiltrate government and society and ultimately turn Western society into Muslim society, and And he's, of course, is accused Abdul al-Sayed of having ties to the Muslim Brotherhood and secretly wanting to impose Sharia law if he's elected governor, which is, of course, patently untrue. All of this, to me, as a conservative, goes against freedom of religion. So, I mean, I'm a huge freedom of religion guy. It's one of those issues that I will defend with, until my dying breath. And so that's why I've really written off Patrick Kolbeck, because as a conservative, the way that you approach issues is you can't just look at, well, how does this issue affect this one group of people that you're, quote, criticizing? You also have to apply it to all other groups of people. So if you're going to say, for instance, like one of the ideas that I heard Patrick Kolbeck put forward is that we need to really monitor and regulate mosques and Islamic religious sites and Islamic religious groups. And that's really troubling to me because, I mean, regardless of, if you're actually afraid of Muslims and you think that, well, there's all these terrorists, that are involved in Muslim groups, I mean, just apply that same standard to any religious group. Apply that to groups that practice Judaism, the Jewish groups, or Christian groups, Catholic groups, Mormon groups. When you do that, then it really kind of you like all the blood leaves your body, and you're like, wow, that's really scary stuff. Now, I personally, I think Islam is a religion of peace. I think that the majority, if not most, of Muslims have no intention of blowing people up. I think this kind of talk is just really to energize the racist pockets that are in the state of Michigan. So I'm 100% against somebody like Patrick Kolbeck when he pushes an agenda like that. Now, that being said, if he were to be elected governor, I don't think he'd be able to implement that kind of policy. I think the state legislature would prevent him from doing that on First Amendment grounds. So even though he might personally have espoused that kind of thinking, he wouldn't be able to implement a plan like that. Now, there are some ideas that Patrick Kolbeck implements that are more fitting with his engineering background that actually might surprise some progressives, because he's actually, of the four Republicans, he's actually the most environmentally conscious of the four, in that because he's an engineer, he wants to, for instance, he makes it a priority of talking about maintaining Michigan's natural resources and sees them as assets. So, for instance, if somebody wanted to, he said that if there was to be, booming oil business in Michigan, he would rather that be done in sort of like an environmentally conscious way. So he would want to invest in a pipeline that can be sustainable and won't crack, as opposed to, for instance, trucks and freighters, which you have a better chance of spillage. So it might surprise, some progressives who are very environmentally conscious to know that Kolbeck, of the four, is, from what I've heard, he's the one who actually looks at Michigan's natural resources as an asset. Now, the fourth candidate, Jim Hines, he's obviously the least well-known. He's by far the least funded. He's just sort of going on a very classic door-to-door kind of campaign, going to, Republican rallies and just trying to get his name out there. He's got some TV ads, but he's the least well-known. He's really kind of just trying to bring like a common sense kitchen table kind of approach to government. I don't know if that will pay off for him in the primary, but we'll see. So,
yeah, it's interesting to me because, my dad was asking. My dad's more conservative. He usually always votes Republican, and I actually said maybe look at Hines or Cali, but I'd say my biggest problem, and I know Lawrence, you wanted to chime in, but
go ahead.
Well, I guess my biggest problem with both Schuette and Cali, because they seem like the two who are most likely to actually take the primary win. Both of them were part of the Michigan state government during the Flint water crisis, and I don't know where you'd stand as somebody who's a Michigan conservative, but for me I feel isn't that immediately disqualifying? It's this happened under your watch, and regardless of what political party you're part of, I feel that's just such a colossal failure of government that it's like, no, you should not be able to continue to run the government of Michigan after a mess up this big.
It's not just to add, not just that, but to add to the conversation that our AG was notified that Rick Snyder lied twice under oath when it came to the Flint water crisis issue, that he did not know anything about it. He did not authorize the emergency manager situation. And Rick Snyder also knew about what was going on with the failing schools in Detroit when they had black mold in them, and some of the schools couldn't operate during the winter because they didn't have any power. Rick Snyder knew about this and lied under oath, and our AG decided to not do anything about it. So, and conservatives always talk about law and order. Well, the people who ran the government just lied and broke the law. So wouldn't that mean that they should deserve some consequences? Like, am I tripping? Like, that's what I want to know.
Well, you're not. Well, as a conservative who always wants to hold the government accountable, I will say that you're not tripping. But what I will say is this. Obviously, I agree with Andy that the Flint water crisis is going to be an albatross that hangs around the neck of anybody who runs in any way connected to Snyder. So I think Bill and Schuette Callie and Schuette are both going to have to come to terms with that as a political albatross. In terms of actually, Bill Schuette's role and Brian Callie's role, I can say that both of them have definitely been more proactive in making sure that kind of mistake doesn't happen again. Now, you can get into a whole discussion of how much the governor's office actually contributed to the Flint water crisis. I've been personally very critical of Rick Snyder because even though he might not have actually made the actual decision himself to switch from the Detroit River to the Flint River, it still came from a broader Republican and conservative philosophy of cutting spending and cutting budget. And I've been very critical of that because I haven't been for, me personally, I have not been for, having no government and having no government spending. I've always advocated for smart spending. And when you're redirecting the water source, for instance, from a water source like the Detroit River that is routinely being purified and doesn't have these high levels of harmful chemicals and harmful materials, to then a Flint water like the Flint water source, which has been historically neglected, and you're just doing this just to save a couple bucks. I don't think that that's necessarily smart governance. Now, again, how much of that can be traced directly to Governor Snyder? I don't think he necessarily made that specific decision. It did come from a broader Republican and conservative philosophy of we need to cut spending where we can, which, you ask any Republican, that is definitely a position that many of them hold. But this obviously, leads them into difficult situations where when you don't completely vet the decisions, you don't consider all the potential outcomes, you run into problems like this. I don't think that necessarily should disqualify Brian Callie, who, again, is of the Republicans, he's the most centrist. So if you're looking for someone who's not going to, if you look at the state of Texas, and if you as a Democrat want to avoid becoming the state of Texas, I as a conservative want to avoid becoming the state of California. I just left there. I lived there for 6 years. They just keep adding tax after tax after tax. We don't want to go to a California model, but I think a lot of Democrats in Michigan would not want to go to a more Texas model. Brian Callie is not going to take us to a Texas model. He's going to be more fiscally conservative, which I think is a good thing for government, but he's not necessarily going to take us to a full-blown Texas model, which I think would scare a lot of Democrats. So, if anything, I think you should be rooting for Brian Callie. He is the most centrist of the bunch. Unless you want to take a chance on a complete outsider like Jim Hines, when we really don't know much about him, we just know that he's a conservative. And if you think that somebody who wants to bring a kitchen table kind of approach to government, if you think that's good, then you can root for Jim Hines I'm just kind of giving you an idea of what the landscape is like, what the candidates are like, and sort of what a little bit about each of them. So,
Okay, great.
I mean, yeah.
So I know we had a couple comments, and then I wanted to pivot to some of the people trying to take on Debbie Stabenow. So popcorn over to Nora and then Lawrence.
Sure.
So you mentioned that, like we were talking, I guess, about how they would handle the Flint water crisis earlier. Now, Colbeck and Hines weren't as deeply involved with that as the executive of Michigan was, of course. What's their approach to that? And if they're, tend to lean more environmentally conscious than most Republicans, would they shut down Line 5? Would that be a priority for them if they consider the natural resources of Michigan to be an asset?
So when I say that Patrick Colbeck is the most environmentally conscious of the 4 Republicans, what I mean by that is that he wants to avoid an environmental spillage, in that he wants to make sure that we don't have a BP oil spillage kind of situation that was had.
Or Kalamazoo or Kalamazoo.
So when I say that, I have no evidence to suggest that Patrick Colbeck is in any way for like a carbon tax, for instance, or for cap and trade, a cap and trade model, or anything to that effect. All the evidence that I have that he is the most environmentally conscious of the 4 Republicans running is simply his statements that he values Michigan's natural resources, he values the Great Lakes, and if he were to approach as governor a situation that were to have I believe that he does support Line 5, but he would want to have a secure pipeline that would, not risk spillage, as opposed to maybe a more cost-effective program such as a truck driving or freighters that risk a greater chance of spillage because of the weather that Michigan endures. So that's what I mean when I say that he's environmentally conscious. Obviously, Patrick Colbeck is not an environmentalist. He's not like Annie Leonard, the Greenpeace, chairwoman,
of course not.
Or anything like that. But that's what I mean, is that he is environmentally conscious for a Republican. It is something that I think matters to him. I think that he wants to maintain Michigan's forests and their landscape, and doesn't have any interest in cutting down a whole bunch of trees and turning Michigan into like a what's an example, into like a Florida, right, with a bunch of development and marshlands, and kind of lose a lot of their natural resources. In terms of Jim Hines, I don't really have him weighing in one way or the other. He's the least known of this. The only thing that I really know about him is that he has a heavy medical background as an obstetrician, and he wants to bring a very common sense, kind of, like I said, kitchen table approach to government. All
right, I'm going to toss it over to
none of them. Yeah, none of them have weighed in specifically on the Flint water crisis, other than it's bad and it shouldn't have happened, and we need to do what we can to avoid it. To my knowledge, I have not encountered anything from them that indicates anything detailed, like many gubernatorial candidates. Again, Callie has the most detailed approach because he's actually in the office, and so it's fairly easy for him, to just say, here's very detailed plans, because this is similar to what he's already doing.
So they're left of Mr. Smithers from The Simpsons. You know what I'm saying? So
no, it'd be Mr. Burns.
Yeah.
Smithers was his henchman.
Yeah, they're left of Mr. They are left of Mr. Burns from The Simpsons. I mean, all right, cool.
I would definitely say there is no Mr. Burns running in the Republican side. Not even Bill Schuette or Brian Kelly would qualify would qualify as a Mr. Burns.
Oh God. So. I mean. Here's the thing: when one of the candidates has a 20-minute PowerPoint talking about the fears of Islam, and there was a study that showed that there is more terrorist attacks that's happened in America by right-wing white males by our federal government. That's saying something about that cognitive dissonance between the two that I don't feel comfortable with, man. Like,
yeah, and I know the study that you're referring to, and I'm sorry to say I don't put a lot of credibility into that study. Not to say that those groups don't exist, and that it attacks from right-wing extremist groups and white nationalist groups don't occur. The issue at hand for me is a freedom of religion and constitutional issue. Yeah. So I have a problem when anybody points to someone who is a Muslim and says, well, we need to watch this person because they're wearing a hijab, or we need to know what's being said in a mosque. We need to monitor what's being said, and we need to even regulate what's being said. All of that is extremely troubling to me because as a practicing Catholic, I look at that and say, well, what if the government decides, we want to know what, this priest is saying in a homily. We want to regulate it. We want to say, well, that shouldn't fly, and we need to know what, if someone's just a part of a religion, what they're doing. Again, this is probably one of the big issues that I have with Republicans in general when I go to Republican events and Republican rallies. I have this really contentious discussion with them, and I try to make it clear to them that if you have to be a constitutional conservative, not just a conservative, because if you're a constitutional conservative, you want to apply the same liberties and freedoms to yourself to really everybody. This is a big issue that I have with a lot of Republicans in Michigan. They want freedoms and they want liberty and they want privacy for themselves. They want the government, to leave them alone. They want the government to respect their freedoms and their religion and their identity and all this stuff. But when it comes to Islam and Muslims, they want the government to make an exception. And that really bothers me because you can't really be a consistent constitutional conservative if that's going to be your approach, because Islam, first of all, I want to dispel with this notion that Islam is a minority religion. It's actually not. There's 1.6 billion people practicing it in the world, and the very fact that right after 9/11, even George W. Bush said that this is not indicative of people who practice Islam, and that Islam is a religion of peace, and that we're not interested in going to war with the religion of Islam, because that just contributes, like if that's your approach, that just contributes to the extremist recruiting that Osama bin Laden was pushing overseas. We're basically saying that the West and America, like they want to kill you because you're Muslim. So that's why I find it troubling when somebody pushes ideas like that, and I want people to just remember, look, it's a religion. It's a valid religion. It's perfectly legitimate. And even if you might have some hang-ups about it, you need to at least respect people and their ability to practice it. Now, that doesn't mean that I think that we should. That doesn't mean that. Now, again, that doesn't mean that I think we should do away with watch lists, and that we should completely abandon national security when there's a credible threat, and we should just throw up our hands and say, oh well, situations like the Boston Marathon bombing are just inevitable and we should just do nothing to prevent them or anything like that. So I'm not for an extreme like, well, let's not even follow credible threats. I think that we need to follow the Constitution. If there's a credible threat, get a warrant. Don't step on the Fourth Amendment of search and seizure. This is why I'm a big Rand Paul supporter, because he actually wants a reasonable approach to national security.
We actually have given him some props.
Yeah, no. Here's the thing. Rand Paul gets props half the time, because half the time he's actually correct on things. Yeah. And half the time. But that's the thing that makes me upset about a lot of the conservatives, not just in that you're talking about, but the ones that I know. So I'm like, if your only image of Islam is ISIS and Al Qaeda, then at the same token, I could say as a black man in America, my only viewpoint of Christianity is the Klan. Because as a black man in America, when it comes to our government sanctioning the brutalization of black people and the minorities in our country, they always done it under the guise of using the Bible to justify what they were doing. So that bothers me, not only as a Christian, because I'm a Christian too, but that bothers me on a number of levels, that you have certain conservatives in Michigan that still pushes that kind of ideology.
All right. So I don't want to get too deep down into the weeds here. Nora, you had one other point, and then I think we really need to start talking about the Senate race.
Okay. I had 2 quick points. Like, first of all, I noticed that you mentioned that one of Schuette's plans for the economy was to try to bring more people into Michigan, and that it's been like on a steady decline for at least a decade now. And it might be hard bringing some of those people back in, especially if he becomes governor, because if the Supreme Court does end up overturning Roe, however you might feel about it, that could alienate a lot of people from the state, and they want to move. And with also in relation to queer rights, like I remember one time Schuette, like, kind of just in the dead of night, like made some order that, kind of challenged employment protections, and the legislature had to work overtime for it. So that's something I'm like, rather skeptical on his end, how he's going to handle, managing that with his, more socially conservative issues that, or hard lines that Brian Kelly or someone like him just wouldn't have. Another question I have is I really want to get a glimpse of the anti-corruption aspect of it. Like, where are each of these candidates taking money from? Who are they bought by? Who are some of them not bought by?
Well, let me first address the comments about Schuette in regards to queer politics and to Roe. Based on my experience in the state, this is a state, I think, in terms of Roe, that in general, of course, you'll find areas that of disagreement here and there, but in my experience in this state, this is a state that generally favors of limitations on abortion. I think you'll find that consistently when you go throughout the state. Obviously, there are going to be areas that are very for no restrictions and no limitations on abortion. But in general, I don't think that overturning Roe would necessarily conflict with the overall culture of the state. Now, first of all, let me just make this very clear. I personally don't believe that Roe will ever be fully overturned. So people who talk about that and think that we're somehow going to go to a Handmaid's Tale kind of a thing, I think are really kind of getting ahead of themselves. And I mean, like, what might happen is that it might go back to the states, and what you might see is a little bit more of a restrictive, path in that way. But I don't think Roe v. Wade is going to completely be overturned. In regards to queer politics, unless you're talking to the log cabin Republicans, queer politics is not really a priority in terms of the Republican Party. Other than that, it's a matter of it's your own business, and you do what you want. That depends on the person's how libertarian they are. It's something that most Republicans aren't really. It's not a really priority of a talking point for them, unless you're talking to the log cabin Republicans, which is, of course.
Just to interject real quick, so just kind of your assessment of the Republican candidates, it's not really, you don't think they're going to be particularly adversarial to the LGBT community?
I don't think so. I mean, from my exposure to Callie and Schuette, I haven't really seen that from them. Colbeck, I mean, you never know. He might be. I don't think Jim Hines is going to be. But it depends really on what you mean by adversarial. I mean, it's the law of the land, at this point. And I think the only thing that you might see is again, something that I support, standing up for religious liberty when it comes to churches and businesses. Now, there's not going to be any discrimination based purely on someone's sexual orientation, but you might sort of see something more protections for businesses that don't necessarily want to participate in same-sex marriage occasions. Like for instance, a photographer that is asked to photograph a gay wedding if they don't feel that they can morally do that. But I don't think you're going to have anybody who sells phones if a gay couple walks in and says, we'd like to buy a phone, they're going to be like, well, you're gay. I'm not going to sell to you. I don't think that would ever happen. Again, this is an issue that the left side of the country kind of likes to run away with and kind of from all these fear theories. I don't think that you'll ever see anything implemented to the sense that would actually cause real discrimination among the LGBT community. That's just my personal take on the Republicans that I see and the discussions that I have at GOP events.
Okay.
Now, to answer Nora's question about who is the least corruption, obviously I don't know these candidates well enough to know what's going on behind closed doors. So I have no idea. But in terms of who's the least funded, so who would be the least susceptible to corruption, it's obviously Jim Hines. So yeah, if you're going to look at, Callie and Colbeck and Schuette, they all are office holders right now. They all have funds coming in from various PACs. They all have support and endorsements from various groups. If that's a red flag in terms of corruption, I mean, that's the reality of anybody who's an office holder who's running for higher office. So I personally don't see a widespread level of corruption. I know that Schuette's had some issues in terms of emails that he's sent that have talked about sort of political campaigning or political discussions, maybe with state-funded resources, such as doing like having a discussion with somebody, with staff members who support him, like in a state-funded building, things to that effect. That's not uncommon of anybody who holds political office. You'll find people on the Democrat side do the exact same thing. So it's I don't really see that as a flagrant charge of corruption, at least in the sense of the other examples that we've seen. I mean, none of them in my perception and my experience with them are going to be like a Rod Blagojevich, to give you an example. None of them are going to be like that, where they're auctioning off political favors.
So, Jack, just I want to get our next guest on in about 10 minutes or so. So I wanted to really hit through the next topic. We just talked about the gubernatorial race. I was wondering if you could also tell us a little bit about the Republicans who are running to take down Stabenow. Unfortunately, the leftist movements could not summon a progressive to unseat Debbie Stabenow via a primary.
Big mistake on our part.
Oh, yeah. The folks at home may be curious about who is trying to run against her.
Well, first of all, don't discount Marcia Squire, the candidate running from the Green Party.
Mm-hmm.
Frankly, if you had more progressives behind her, I think she'd be a lot more well-known in the state. But the problem is that the Green Party is kind of a bugaboo when it comes to progressives. They were like one day they'll support it, one day they won't support it. People kind of just really need to commit. If you're really fed up with the Democratic Party, then get behind the Green Party completely, and start supporting the Green Party if you think that's a better alternative. But to answer your question, the two candidates that are running for the Republican nomination are John James, who is a combat veteran who flew Apache helicopters in Iraq. He's also a business owner in Southeast Detroit. He recently got Trump's endorsement on last Friday. The other candidate is Sandy Pensler, who is a little bit more of a moderate or even liberal Republican. He used to be pro-choice. He says now he's pro-life. He kind of strikes me as more of a Mitt Romney kind of a Republican. He runs a detergent business, and he also ran kind of like a smaller scale Bain Capital kind of a business where he would go in and buy failing businesses and try to turn them around in a similar way that Bain Capital would under Mitt Romney. So he's kind of more like a Mitt Romney kind of a Republican in that he's fairly moderate. He's more interested in the economic side, I think in the social side. John James, who I personally support, I just think that John is the best candidate that the Republican Party in general has put forward because, he's got an open mind, number one. So he doesn't necessarily conform to dogmatic ideologies. But he is also a strong conservative who has convictions and fights for what he believes in the same way that you'll see that on the progressive side. And I don't think that John James is necessarily interested in alienating anybody. I think he wants at the end of the day to see Michigan prosper and bring more jobs to Michigan and also do things that I think will be really good for Michigan. Also, at the same time, I think he's going to pursue a level of I want to say conservatism that will frankly be really good in Washington. For instance, he really supports a strong immigration policy, which originally, I used to be very moderate on immigration. I've since become much stronger on immigration, really because of the alternative.
Like open border strong?
Well, when I say strong on immigration, I mean emphasizing legal immigration, creating easier paths to residency, and ending like the visa lottery program, which I think is just completely unfair to anybody who's trying to get into this country. Like it's completely random. It's never based on needs or skills or anything that you're going to contribute. I think that it's random and unfair to somebody who's trying to get in. I also think that that in terms of immigration, I'm 100% against an open border. Really, just because you need to have some kind of immigration law, and I look at this as like, well, why does the United States have to follow a different set of rules than the rest of the world? I mean, there are so many other countries in the world that have borders and have strict immigration rules for people who are coming in, and they don't just say, all right, just come on in, we won't ask any questions. I feel like it's really dangerous to sort of go down that road. And so I know that you guys, especially because you guys are progressive Democrats, you're really interested in the abolishment of ICE. For instance, I personally think that is a very precarious proposal, to put it gently, because my exposure to ICE has been largely that they're not like the Gestapo. Like there's this perception that they're going to just round up people who are even legal immigrants, who are in complete legal standing. The only instances that I've seen of that where ICE has gone after people who are legal immigrants are because they've somehow lied on their application, or they've committed some type of fraud or something like that. But they're primarily interested in keeping communities safe. And my position is that if you want to abolish ICE, then why stop there? Why not abolish your local sheriff's department?
Yeah. All right. Fantastic. We're on the same page. No, I'm sorry. No, well, actually, I know you and me were having a discussion about the open borders thing a while ago. I was more just kind of razzing you about that. But, to be fair, like we talk a lot about our criticism of ICE, and, to be fair, sometimes they do actually prevent legitimate crimes. Why a pre-existing law enforcement agency couldn't just do that instead?
Well, see, here's the thing is that after 9/11, Bush made the decision to make immigration control part of Homeland Security, which I don't think was necessarily the wrong thing to do. Because before it was handled more as a labor department, and it was mainly being patrolled by the states, which of course their funding for border security will go up and down based on how they're spending in other ways. I do think that one of the government's roles is
Excuse me, Jack. Jack?
Sure, go ahead.
Sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, but we're running a little short on time. I did want to leave off one thing. So, we've spent the last few weeks talking about the governor's race, and, as far as we are all kind of in the tank for Abdul El Sayed. And one thing I wanted to pick your brain about as somebody on the other side of the aisle, as it were. One of the big complaints that, he's getting from more centrist Democrats is that, with such a heavily Republican legislature, he wouldn't be able to actually get his policies passed. And I was kind of curious what you might think about that as an anti-corruption conservative.
Do you want me to answer that now or after you come back from the break?
Oh, no, you answer that now.
Okay.
We'll go to the break after this section.
I'd say just give a quick answer.
Yeah.
Sure. So I think of the three Democrats running for governor, Abdul El Sayed is by far and away the most progressive. I don't think there's any doubt of that. I'm not sure how he would get along with the Republican legislature. I obviously, I don't know if Michigan is really ready for a progressive like him that really has an aggressively progressive plan. I think that some of the things he's proposing are not very good for the state of Michigan. I, for instance, am 100% against a carbon tax because we're an industrialized state that depends heavily on our automotive business, and that would frankly cripple it. To what extent the carbon tax should be is obviously a matter of debate. But I think that obviously it's good to have a progressive voice. When I watched him in the debates, I think he's the most intellectual of the Democrats running. I think he's the most academic. I think he's the best debater. Who can argue the strongest. I don't think that people who are saying that he is like Obama are that wrong. I think that he does have a certain callback to Barack Obama in his oratory skills. Does that kind of answer your question? I do also have opinions on Gretchen Whitmer and Sri Thanadar as well. I can share those if you like.
I don't think we have a ton of time, honestly.
Yeah, I really appreciate you coming on the show, Jack, and we'll invite you back. Probably be opportunities like this for a little bit more crosstalk. So, have yourself a good one. And again, thanks for taking the time to come speak to us on the show about the primary.
All right, great. Thanks for having me, guys. I appreciate it.
Okay, all right. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and disconnect you, and then we're gonna take a quick little break, and we're gonna go to our next guest. We've got Chris Wahmoff here. He is a local activist who has been monitoring local water quality for some years now, and we are going to have a discussion about the Parchment water crisis. We will be right back. This is the Hoodrat Strategist radio program, only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are back. This is the Hoodrat Strategist radio program, only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo. We're joined by a good friend of the show, Chris Wahmoff, and we're going to deep dive into what's been going on in Parchment, the Parchment water crisis. And, you know, I preface it by saying it's like I feel like most of us in the community have already heard about this, but just to break it down real quick, there's test results show that PFAS levels are more than 20 times higher than the EPA's lifetime health advisory. There's a big press conference just a few days ago with the sheriff, a lot of other county officials, basically telling residents not to drink the water. Bottled water was brought in the same kind of style as Flint. Pointedly, I saw a lot of photographs of Nestle water being shipped in, which, granted, like, I didn't have enough time to really snoop, but I'm not sure if that was actually being bought by the city or just volunteers. Whoever's buying it, stop.
Seriously.
Please buy other water that is not being extracted from our groundwater for pennies on the dollar. So, so Chris, I hit you up specifically because I know you've been on top of water quality and water contamination struggles for years. You know, you fought up against Enbridge. You did the famous protest in their pipeline. And I know that you've been very vocal talking about the Parchment crisis as well. So just want to ask kind of like, what are your initial thoughts? And, frankly, are you surprised to hear about this?
And sadly, I'm not. And of course, appreciate you having me on here. I appreciate it. There's a lot I got for this, so I want to dive right on. And the easy answer is I don't think that anybody in this area is surprised that we have bad water, because it's not just Parchment that we have bad water in. We just the day before, I believe, yesterday, ours was here yesterday in Parchment. We were supposed to have one in Otsego tomorrow, which has been canceled. If anybody was planning on going to that is now next Wednesday at 4 p.m. in Otsego at the non-Catholic church. I can't think of the name of right now. There's a lot to the Otsego one. There's really a lot about that because they've identified a lot more chemicals in Otsego than just PFAS. And I think that while maybe that isn't Parchment and it's not Kalamazoo, this is the most hydrologically connected area in the country, if not the world. And I think we have to realistically consider what chemicals we have in our water, not just the PFAS. PFAS are dangerous. There's over 3,000 of them. They're in everything. We know the Teflon and other things, but even when you're putting on raincoats and things like that, it's in there. So they are around us, but we still have to be realistic about dangerous levels. So pairing immediately, I want to get this out so people know it's available. I have heard that a lot of people at the meeting last night who have wells were looking for places to test, and a lot of people expressed that they didn't feel like they got answers they could have. So I want to share, throw it up on the Facebook page for you guys. We have at least 3 of them. I believe Professional just sent more, 3 labs that are certified for testing PFAS that either do blood or environmental well tests, so that people can get that. If you do call them, they're going to be a lab. Just call the lab, explain your situation, and they do serve individuals, the ones that we're forwarding, I believe, so they'll be able to work with you. So there are places. I want people to understand there are places you can go to. We have at least 3 of them. We're going to share more. Also, there is a professional from Washington State. Her name is Elizabeth Julia. She's a transfer. She actually came here in Kalamazoo. She cares a lot about the community here. And she has done a lot of research about the PFAS out on the West Coast. And she said she's willing to do like a digital town hall. We're going to put something together so that either people can come somewhere, or else we'll do a conference call kind of setting so that people can ask her questions. We'll we'll get that organized. We just found out for sure we were going to do it today, but we want to make those things available so that people have additional answers beyond maybe what they got last night. And then that kind of brings up the question of what are some of the other answers we need. And I'm going to also send you guys, I want to throw a couple posts that I have. And I want to say, you got to be careful when you're doing something like a Facebook post.
Yeah,
so I want to quickly acknowledge something like that, okay? And this is a cause to ask questions. This isn't a claim. I'll double that. This is a cause to ask questions. This is not a claim. What we started seeing in social media on Thursday night are a couple of things. One of them is that Kalamazoo immediately started hooking up their water source. And that's important because that was very expeditious. When you look in contrast to Flint, that's something that happened that's very expeditious. And that was something that I complained about. Something that you also look at on the press release that Kalamazoo sent out, and this is why I started complaining, is that they talk about two cases of water. They talk about drained water and they talk about flushed water. Those are legal terms, drained water and flushed water. Now, Kalamazoo in all of their sense releases will acknowledge where the flushed water is going, that the flushed water is going to the Kalamazoo Treatment Center. I started saying what happened with the drained water, saying did they dump it into the Kalamazoo? And there was somebody that responded to me on social media that they claimed to know somebody in the city of Kalamazoo. I'll put it up. I'm not going to put her name, and if you question that, then that's fine with me, whatever. I'm just not going to grill somebody for a situation like that. That's not fair to her. But she said that Parchment had made the decision to dump the water into the river on Thursday night. Now, keep in mind also, if you look at all of the things that they put, Thursday night, there's no mention that water is going to start going to the Kalamazoo River until the next day, and there was a whole bunch of flash.
Keep in mind, they still haven't fully cleaned up the spill from Enbridge 6B in the Kalamazoo River while this is getting poured into.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and exactly what you just said is why it's very important to understand that we need to understand what chemicals are in there. In the example of PCBs, not PFAS, I don't know the PFAS, but in the example of PCBs, anywhere where the oil touched PCBs, it became 18 times more dangerous. In every instance where the oil touched the PCBs. That's in one instance with one hydrocarbon. We're talking about potentially thousands of different chemicals in a concoction. And this brings me to the next thing that's very important, is we have a public servant that also went on social media and said that there are tests missing for back to 25 years in the Parchment water. And that in itself is a statement that those aren't up to par. But then additionally, we have to again find out if those are missing, what was in that water, and if all that missing water was drained into the Kalamazoo River and not flushed with small particles only in the very diluted levels hitting the river. The people on wells need to know that information, and they need to be able to take steps to prepare themselves. And quite frankly, I think that any of the communities downriver, if we find this out, need to start asking them why they discharged all of this water and didn't send anything out to all the downstream communities who no doubt had people kayaking and kids playing in the river. And that's, again, it's not a claim, but when people are making statements like this, those statements are there. If this is a police investigation, that is enough to start an investigation. And that's not something that we need to ask about. That needs to happen. And again, after that, just the other thing I want to kind of put out is we have a lot of communities, Battle Creek, Kalamazoo today had an article about our PFA levels that are noticeable, just like Portage, which makes sense because Portage is hooked up to Kalamazoo water. So we have all of these communities, and then we have down to Otsego, who we've got to work on because they have very serious chemicals and it's being very underreported. And that needs to be addressed because that likely is going to be relevant to all of us that have these same issues.
I think we've talked before on the show a little bit about the whole situation going on with justice for Otsego, and it's interesting to me how this their organizing started out several months ago, talking about the way that this corporation had made basically just their left behind chemicals had made the community sick, had really caused a lot of significant damage to people in that community. And now we're finding out about this contaminated water in Parchment. Now, not to necessarily ask that they're linked, but what do you see? Because overall, this having West Michigan has dealt with this kind of problem before, and just kind of looking at a bigger picture, what is the consistent failure that always allows these kind of crises to come about and occur?
The first thing is that we never demand safety, we demand control of a situation. And we have to start going past control of a situation. They openly tell us every single time there is an accident. The word that gets used more than safe, which they do use a lot, but the word that they'll use more than that is control. And that's because they're telling us they have control of the situation. And the problem with that is that for the last at least decade longer, private industry has had an opportunity to put a large incentive in our public leaders and organizations like the MDEQ through our state law to favor their business partners. Right now, if there is a crisis, like in any of these communities, I think in MDEQ it's the 9th most important, which is dead last, and in the EPA it's 15th most last importance, which is dead last. The community has 9th and 15th in ranking of input. Man. And these are things that are in our control. We had a country that organized several times and brought all the people that we feel like are too powerful for their knees by boycotts, by organizing, and by unionizing. And we need to look at those things like this. All of us that have communities, we need to look at the things that we have like in Otsego and these extra chemicals. We need to look at where there are common denominators that we have chemicals we want independent testing for, and all of the communities that relate to that, we need to work on organizing together to get somebody to test it. Maybe a community like Otsego doesn't have enough on its own, but if we pair that with Battle Creek and we pair that with Kalamazoo and we pair that with Parchment, then all of a sudden 4 of us that didn't have enough to do it by themselves do now. And we need to look at that. We need to look at all of these communities immediately filing FOIAs with their local government and with the other governments. And when we get these things together, we've got lawyers from the ACLU, NLG, and all of these places that are willing to help. And we need to come in and we need to start taking accountability. And the people themselves need to organize these class actions. And then we need to see who gets in our way and make sure those people are never elected again. And who doesn't get in the way, we need to empower them to make sure that they can do what they need to do.
Wow, that's some very concrete and very important advice. I think there's going to be some meetings coming out of this one. But Nora, did you have something? I'm sorry, I thought maybe.
Keep in mind, this is like we're having like city after city, small town after small town in the state of Michigan where these water crises are happening when we're completely surrounded by the world's largest supply of fresh water. So, and for those of you that don't know about Nestle yet, they're the ones that are bottling up this stuff like crazy just outside of Flint even. Mm-hmm. They're trying to grab this massive aquifer in South America. You seriously need to boycott them if you aren't already. Don't buy Ice Mountain. Don't buy Hot Pockets. Don't buy Kit Kats. Don't buy Butterfingers. I know it's hard. Do your research. They have a lot of products, but just stay away from them if you respect the Great Lakes, honestly. I guess also on top of this, I absolutely agree. Like the people who are responsible for this, like they should not be any close to the levers of power and government again. But I'm still very concerned with the way our effed up political system works, that very few people are going to pay the political price for it. We were just talking about, Shooty and Callie, how are they going to manage being partially responsible for the Flint water crisis? The thing is, they probably might not have to, because those two already did massive voter suppression in the 2016 election. what's going to happen? I don't know. Will we get out there enough to overclock it, and will voting be enough to stop that? The answer to the second part is of course not. But we really do need to get these kind of creative ways of organizing to make sure that the people in our state can, consistently get the water and the infrastructure they need, and that these rivers that are connected to our Great Lakes aren't so haphazardly polluted.
Yeah, and so I'd like to follow up, Chris, with just one or two questions. What are some of the adverse health effects that people have been seeing from, PFAS and, some of the other, chemicals that have been cropping up in the area?
For PFAS, actually, I gotta say, I have focused so much on other things that I'm more the student than the teacher right now for PFAS. So I'm learning. It seems like kind of similar to the PCBs and dioxins, or anything from the oil spill. We have all the usual carcinogens that it's going to cause rare cancers, health effects of your immune system, education, early childhood educational problems. I can't remember the technical word. I know specifically with some of the dioxins and things, we've seen, and all across the area, we're seeing all of the things with reproductive. I know that's one of the big things in Otsego, obviously in Kalamazoo, the title we've had for double the national average, which again comes back to how much do we actually have in common with more than just this? How much we have the PFAS, but how many dioxins, how many PCBs, and realistically, before we can medically address how we turn these health impacts around, you have to know what the variables are in anything. If we don't know what these chemicals are, we don't know what these chemicals have combined to do. We don't know what those impacts look like together. And the first step, and that's why these things are so important, is the first step is we have to get all the variables. We have to realistically know the amount in the scope of chemicals that we're dealing with. And I don't think that any of these communities know that for sure. And I don't know that any of them in Michigan or even in the country know that for sure, because we have a lot of major changes we need to make, and that's that first step.
All right, so we've only got a couple minutes left. I did want to kind of close out by just asking, was there anything else you really wanted to mention that we didn't get around to on the show? And just kind of reiterate to people, I know you listed a few resources, people who either want to organize around this, or people who maybe need assistance, who don't have access to clean water right now.
We're gonna make we'll be putting those up. Again, we're gonna be organizing a meeting. I want to again shout out for Otsego, because this is important because of the chemicals that are acknowledged and involved. Next Wednesday, August 8th at 4 p.m. That's something that's important that people need to pay attention to, because we've got chemicals there that haven't probably been tested for missing 25 years in our local water. And if it's there, it's not unrealistic at all to say it's here. So it's all about understanding that and supporting that community, because we're in this together. And the other thing, just if people need any help, I'm willing to put my information. If any of the people about the wells, they want to talk to the lab, anything like that, I'm willing to personally help people with that, because I know it can be a lot to take in when you start learning these scientific terms and they start telling you about chain of custody or something. And maybe just as a closer, because it's important, I think it's important to say every single day that I was told once, change begins in the mirror, and then your house, your street, and your city. And that's how we turn this around at a local level. You gotta just first believe that it matters if you do something about it, because it does. And then find like-minded people. We're going to be trying to do everything we can to get information out. connect with your neighbors at these events. Connect with your neighbors just because, and see what you guys want to do on your street. Do you guys want to figure out something here or there? And just take part, because it's going to take a lot of people doing little things to realistically turn any of the problems we have around.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show, Chris. Nora, any parting thoughts?
Just vote on 7th.
Yeah, vote on the 7th. Vote on the 7th. And I'm not going to tell you who to vote for, but Sri Thanadar is a faux-aggressive billionaire who abuses animals, and George Franklin is a Republican. So, any of those other candidates, So, all right. Y'all have a good day. This has been the Hoodrat Strategist radio program, only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo. Tune in next week and keep on fighting for that revolution solution.